Let's talk greenskins in Warhammer 40k's new edition. We've got the first datasheet for the Orks, and in a fun preview that hopefully predicts the rest of their range, it's got powerful abilities, but the ability to blow himself up in not one but three different ways. Hello and welcome back to Warspec Tactics, where today we're talking Orks, and today we're going to be focusing on the new Weirdboy datasheet that Games Workshop have given to us, plus a few general thoughts as to the orky army list and how it's going to function in 10th. Obviously very early days yet, but it looks like we can confirm at least a few changes, and while I talked through the psychic powers in the previous video about the psychic phase, I thought we'd actually look at the Weirdboy from the Orks perspective, as it does potentially have a few nice hints for the army. In 10th edition so far, Games Workshop has been very much focusing on the big mainline factions, Space Marines versus Tyranids at the moment, and so far we've had kind of limited information that isn't about one of those. We do know that just with the drastic simplification that 10th edition is going to bring, a whole load of mechanics are basically going to get cut out of the orky army. Other specific sections of the codex that aren't either on the datasheets or can fit in a 2-page spread are going to go away, unfortunately. It seems unlikely that we'll be able to access things like custom jobs, and it seems likely that clan choice is perhaps going to get hemmed in with different orky fighting style detachments instead, maybe ones that focus on different army archetypes. A lot of stratagems are going to be condensed onto the datasheets, though I would say that maybe the orky ones aren't super powerful right now, to be honest, and a few things like certain combos of relics and warlord traits will be going away. You're only going to be able to get one enhancement per boss. Looks like there's going to be no more combo of things like Brutal but Cunning and a Killer Claw. I do think though that detachments in the new 40k will be more interesting for Orks than perhaps some of the other armies. Orks are just an army that has some really strong army archetypes and have some very fluffy formations that you can field in game. My hope would be that when Games Workshop eventually releases their codex, there'll be armies that represent a Green Tide, a Dread Mob, a Speed War, maybe a mega armoured blitz brigade in battle wagons, and maybe one formation for the beast snaggers. Otherwise, I guess they might just choose to dedicate them around certain clan themes. They could just package up the fighting styles of things like Bad Moon shooting or Death Skulls looting, and call that an army but not necessarily have to lock it to the given clans. They do seem to be keen that paint doesn't equate to rules now. Other things that Orks might enjoy is that it looks like morale is not going to be anywhere near as bad an issue as it was previously. Even if they might take some negative consequences of battle shock, at least they won't be losing models. With the new morale phase changes meaning that it takes half squads to take morale tests, regardless of how big they are, it will mean that bigger mobs should be a little bit more viable. They might be a tiny bit more susceptible to morale for most, as there's a bit more chance of them being injured but not fully destroyed, but nowhere near as bad a disparity as it is at the moment, where the current morale system really punishes big mobs. Otherwise, weapon rules could be kind of interesting as well. I kind of expect custom mega weapons to get the hazardous keyword and overheat on once, and if they did choose to keep the same sort of stat lines for Daka weapons, they could actually realise that through the rapid fire rule now. The way that the core rules work is that they can codify different numbers of shots at half range and at full range, and it doesn't have to be literally double. It's going to be really interesting to take a look through the full list of Ork datasheets, but for the moment let's take a look through the Weirdboy one and talk about what we've got so far. Obviously we've got no points or anything yet, so we can't say how strong he's going to be. If he's costed too high, then he's going to be bad, or too low, then he's going to be auto-include, but it certainly looks like a fair amount of his abilities are potentially useful. First up, his defense has maybe taken a bit of a side grade. It looks like Orks are still going to be Toughness 5 in the new edition, keeping that change that they had in 9th. Looks like they're still remaining tougher than your average Space Marine. Interestingly as well though, the Weirdboy has gained a 5+ armor save, as opposed to the normal 6+ save that he has now, and that could genuinely be a big deal in an edition where AP is going to get a bit more limited. He gets a 6+ save against a power axe now, for example. However, it does look like it's a bit of a side grade for him as an HQ. He's only down to 4 wounds as opposed to the 5 that he had before. I guess overall as a model he might have got a little bit less durable, though I guess he is going to be protected in a squad as a leader. Otherwise there's an interesting change to his movement as well. Looks like he's movement 6 as opposed to movement 5. Orks might be just getting a little bit faster and more in line with other infantry types, rather than being a touch on the slow side. That'd definitely be handy for regular Ork infantry to get around the battlefield. Would be a nice boost to the Green Tide if the infantry are just a little bit on the quicker side. He's only got Objective Control 1, looks like characters aren't going to be better on that front, and his leadership characteristic is a 7+. For this guy it means that he's going to take Battle Shock on a 58% chance if he's brought down to 1 wound remaining, and my guess would be that this is probably going to be the same leadership characteristic that we see on regular Ork mobs. It still looks like compared with other factions they are going to take Battle Shock more often than most, Potentially it could be pretty painful if it messes with their objective scoring, but still at least it won't affect the damage game too much. You won't have mass rats of tons of boys heading for the hills just because they've taken a casualty. Finally, the keywords seem kind of as expected, an infantry character who's a psyker, and he's got the faction keyword Orks, no real surprises there. Then for his core abilities, he's got 3, Leader, Deadly Demise, and War. Leader's going to be the new character one, meaning that he will be attaching to squads. He can't just go around solo like he does at the moment, and my guess would be that, as with the Primaris Lieutenant that we saw, he's probably going to have to attach to orcs of a similar sort of size to him. I'd guess regular boys, maybe knobs, hopefully the other standard sized boys mobs if he can. Things like looters and burners will be kind of cool to teleport around. I'd guess he probably wouldn't be able to attach to things like Mega Knobs or Gretchen, though I suppose we'll wait and see. Deadly Demise is kind of fun to see here on the profile. Apparently they're going to be giving him an explosion rule. I guess Weirdboys aren't exactly known to be the most stable psychers in the world, so it seems that even if he's just slain regularly, you'll roll a dice to see if he blows up. On a 6, that'll be D3 mortal wounds to units nearby. I'd guess it's probably going to be the standard 6 inches explosion. They haven't actually confirmed that yet 100%, but it will be mortal wounds. As mentioned, I do find it kind of fun that he's got 3 different ways to blow himself up here on the datasheet. Maybe they're trying to get back to a bit of orky randomness. I feel like that's often been a request that I've seen on orky rules. Have powerful abilities, but just have the odd chance to have them blow up spectacularly in your face can make for a bit more of a fun game. Finally, we know the Ork army-wide ability is going to be War. This is going to be the common one that's on every single one of their detachments, and then joined by a second rule to back it up. My guess would be that given it's the Orky battle cry to propel them into combat and commit some fun acts of violence, I think it would probably be a speed boost into combat. Currently it's advance and charge, and a little bit more extra damage when you get into the fight. I think there's a reasonable chance that it stays like this. Maybe it'll also encompass the reroll charges that they have at the moment. That's been a common Orky rule for quite a long time. Will be interesting to see if they still have the differentiation between the War and the Speed War. As an army-wide rule, it would be kind of helpful if it applies to both the shooting and the melee units in the codex. Next up, in combat, he's got his Weirdboy staff, 3 attacks at strength 8, AP 1 and damage D3. Fairly general purpose and pretty much the same as it was now. I think the only extra addition is the psychic keyword, which I suspect is largely going to be a hindrance rather than a help. Some units will get a save against it, like that librarian with his psychic hood. Speaking of psychic powers, I think a fair few people were a little bit disappointed just to see the one option for a psychic power on the datasheet, but at least it's arguably one of the best ones. He does get a psychic shooting attack, which we'll get onto, but out of the rest of the tree he's only got access to Da Jump. It doesn't look like there's any options for trading that out for say things like Fists of Gork or Warpath. We do have other psychers in the faction though, the Weirdboy and the Kill Rig. They should be manifesting some different alternative powers, so there will be other options, though I guess they might be drawn from the Beast Head discipline rather than the standard one. In terms of the rules, you get just 1 jump per army per turn, so there's not really that much value in having more than 1 Weirdboy. I guess it would mean that you're likely just to run 1. And again, it's got a rather spectacular way of blowing up in your own face if you're unlucky. Roll a dice, and on a 2+, the unit gets to teleport. On a 1, the unit gets D6 mortal wounds. Really quite brutal, and could kill something like 50 points worth of orcs or so, depending on what unit you're in. It is kind of fun, but I feel like that's a very significant downside there. It's probably not going to be sensible to jump unless you're actually getting really quite a big gain from it. Probably one towards the start of the game to get line of sight or get a first turn charge attempt, and then maybe think about not trying to blow up your own boys from then unless you're brave. As before, if you do successfully teleport, you get to redeploy to 9 inches away from the enemy. It isn't targetable now, so it has to be the Weirdboy's own unit, so you wouldn't be able to pick another unit nearby and then jump it over to something useful with the Weirdboy staying put. Still though, it's definitely very powerful, a massive mobility boost to get an important unit exactly where it needs to be, getting line of sight on something nasty, or potentially threatening a turn 1 charge. Kind of unreliable if it's out to 9 inches, but I guess we'll see what sort of charge buffs orcs get. Wouldn't be surprised if they have something. Lastly for the datasheet, we have his Edbanger psychic power. This is the one where he gets a bit angry and makes the head of an enemy war boss explode, and it basically functions as a psychic shooting attack now that automatically goes off, but you still need to roll to hit. The profile's a 24-inch range, a single shot, hitting on a 4+ rather than a 5, strength 6, AP 3 and damage 1, but ideally you want him to be in a fairly big mob of orcs as it gets significantly more dangerous. Apparently for every 5 orcs that he's leading, you'll be getting more strength and damage on it, so it goes up to strength 10, damage 5 on a mob of 20 boys. It potentially could be higher than this if it goes all the way up to squad size 30 still, though I'm not 100% sure that's going to be the case. If mob size is still 30 though, that'd be going up to strength 12 and damage 7. That does seem ridiculously potent. Seems like that would be an enormous anti-tank weapon, let alone a character sniping thing if mob size still goes up that high. Speaking of which, it does look like it's got the precision keyword. That's going to be a sniping rule of some sort, certainly able to target characters within units. It might even have a rule where you might be able to choose the model in the squad that takes damage, potentially sniping heavy weapons or something, depending on how Games Workshop's written it. The idea is, I guess, that you get him in range of an enemy character with a big mob of boys to back him up, and then to try and make the enemy commander's head explode. Seems just a little bit unreliable on a hit roll of a 4+, though I guess you could CP roll it if you're against a very high value target. On top of that, it also gains the hazardous keyword if it gets to a decent amount of power. That seems likely to be 1 mortal wound on a hit roll of 1. Maybe quite a big deal actually if you've only got 4 wounds to start with. Overall though, he does seem like quite a fun and useful little unit to have around. I'd say dad jump is the most important thing that he can do, though against some armies that headbanger rule could genuinely be pretty brutal. So overall, I'd say that the Weirdboy is pretty interesting points dependent. The jump could still be great for a massive orky positioning boost, though it's not without its risk it seems. Let me know what you make of it. Is it going to be worth the risk of blowing up d6 of your own orcs to get that sweet positioning advantage? I feel like maybe Headbanger might be just be a little bit more brutal on paper than it actually is in practice. You've only got a 4+ chance to hit, it's not guaranteed even with a command reroll. You might well fail to wound as well if the enemy character is kind of tough, and then most important characters tend to have an invul save of some sort. That's another barrier to damage there, and it seems likely that the enemy is going to command point reroll that if it is going to be the difference between a character living and dying. For the times when it does actually work though, it'll be absolutely brutal and kind of hilarious to make one of the enemy commander's bosses explode. Still though, overall looks like a pretty fun datasheet, and I'd say it looks like a good start with the greenskins. Should be fun to see what other rules and previews Games Workshop gives for them as the rules start to drop. So anyway, let me know your thoughts on the Weirdboy down in the comments below. Do you think he looks interesting, or do you feel like Games Workshop has made him a touch too unreliable? And what do you make of the leadership changes and potential of movement 6 and 5+ armour? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Orks Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day, and I'm sure I'll have plenty more for 10th. Finally, if you've been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Orks Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that links down in the video description if you'd like to help support. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.